Back in 2001, somewhere on a military airfield north of Beijing, an aircraft due to be used for high-level governmental visits, a new Boeing 767-300ER with all the trimmings, sat unused with parts of its innards torn out. Just days before its planned maiden voyage, Chinese military communications experts discovered numerous high-tech listening devices planted inside the aeroplane. The plane was grounded and never served its intended purpose. On the 1st of April 2001, a United States Navy Ares Mark II intelligence gathering aircraft and a Chinese J-8 Mark II interceptor jet collided in midair, resulting in the death of Wang Wei, a People's Liberation Army Air Force pilot whose body was never found. In 2015, it was discovered that the US National Security Agency, NSA, used a partnership with Denmark's Foreign Intelligence Unit to spy on senior officials of neighbouring countries, including German Chancellor Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron, amongst other European leaders. Nowadays, it is America that accuses China of spy plots, only largely without evidence. Welcome to the 3Ms. A very good morning, afternoon, or evening to you, wherever you might be, and a warm welcome to the fourth edition of our still relatively fresh show, The 3Ms, abbreviated to the 3Ms, the show where we peel back the layers of misunderstanding and misinterpretation that lead to misinformation. My name is Ian Ingalls, and I shall be your host. I'm glad to be joined, as ever, by my two fellow China expat experts, Jerry Gray and Fernando Munoz. Good afternoon, gents.
Hi.
Hi, Ian.
So, as ever, I shall be picking the brains of this knowledgeable pair as we look at various topical and ongoing news stories pertaining to China. In our previous shows, we discussed the US Congress's Uyghur Policy Act, China's much-rumoured social credit system, as well as China's impending economic collapse. A quick reminder to all of our viewers that the three of us collectively have around 65 years of experience of living and working here in China in different parts of the country, which is definitely something that many representatives of Western mainstream media cannot claim to have. Okay, so let's get stuck in. We've heard about the spy balloon, the spy pigeon, and spying cars. Now, it really looks as though this is a race to the bottom of a rabbit hole, to mix some metaphors. Jerry, what is the latest spy news?
Hi, Ian. Well, the latest spy news is that both the European Union and Australia have jumped on the same bandwagon. This is not a new thing either. The other day, Biden signed an executive order asking one of his favorite ladies, Gina Raimondo, to look into the problem of cybersecurity in the ports. Now, both regions, Australia and EU, have followed suit with their own concerns. One thing I want to point out, though, is that I've actually read the White House release, the executive order, and I found something really interesting. Over the next 5 years, they're planning to change their port container handling equipment, most of which is currently Chinese-made, for new equipment from a company called Pacific Engineering Company, PASECO. This is a US-based subsidiary of Mitsui, a Japanese company that built port handling facilities from 1958 to the 1980s. Can you imagine why they might have left the USA back in the 1980s, guys? I think you might have guessed it. 30 years ago, the trade enemy was Japan. Today, the trade enemy is China. In a few years' time, we can bet money they'll be banning Indian doctors from the country or Indian technology from their computers. And I think that's the way it's going to go with the United States.
So you think that this is primarily trade-related or even perhaps something protectionist in its nature and in its rationale, rather than sparked by, genuine fears of national security? That's fascinating. How about you, Fernando? Do you have anything to add to this?
Most certainly, Ian, I do think so. It's not just the executive office. Both Florida and Texas have imposed state laws, and one of them is actually to prevent, just as Jerry just said, the doctors and other scientists can work in their states. Florida has actually imposed two laws already. One of them has been overturned by the Supreme Court, and that one was to prevent foreigners from purchasing land in the state. Now, there are more than 280 academics at Florida University who have already signed a petition to allow an open door policy, so to speak, on hiring. But the state governor, Ron DeSantis, has taken it upon himself to say that that is just what it's going to be. But it gets even worse. The Florida International University, that operates here in China, has already closed down two of its international campuses, one in Qingdao and one in Tianjin. Yet reports confirm that there has never been a public suggestion or any proof that Florida International University programs in China had been involved in leaking any kind of secrets or holding undue influence over the school. One of the campuses was a Spanish language school, and the other was a joint venture with Marriott Hotels in courses related to hotel management. So one has to wonder how useful the Spanish is when it comes to spying in China, or how much spying can be done when you learn how to fold sheets. But anyway, I digress.
Well, no, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it sounds crazy to me. Now, unless I'm missing something, I wouldn't have thought that, a college offering courses in, as you say, like folding bed linen or setting the dining table correctly would be privy to any sort of secrets or sensitive information in any case. Again, unless I'm missing something fundamental here.
Well, did you know that China never had a one-child policy? That was the name given to it by Western media. There was a family planning policy whereby most of the population were encouraged, and quite firmly so, to have one child. Special rules applied for ethnic minorities. They were completely excluded. All the ethnic minorities were excluded from it, and so were the Hong Kong and Macau special administrative regions, as well as the regions of Tibet and Xinjiang. Manchus, Koreans, Russians, Hui, Mongols in Inner Mongolia were subjected to 2 children. And also in rural regions, all people who had a daughter as their firstborn child were allowed to try for a son as a second-born child. So it was never really a one-child policy. The limit was 2. So if a second child was another daughter, then no more could be applied for during that time. And for the most part, the laws that I've read mention rewards for compliance much more than they do punishments for non-compliance. So there you have it. Did you know that there was never such a thing as the one-child policy, just a family planning policy for China?
I feel that, US and potentially other Western academic institutions pulling out of their China operations or projects, or in this case, their courses, sends a message that China's not simply a peer competitor, or whatever the expression is they use. I mean, you can at least engage with a competitor, but an enemy. I mean, they're turning their back and leaving. I mean, for me, actions speak louder than words, and I mean, I can't help but think that, when it comes to the universities, the academic sphere, I mean, this can only have a long-term detrimental effect in terms of the numbers of Chinese students who decide to go to the US and the UK to study each year to undergo higher education. I had a quick look at the figures, and I mean, at their highest point, 2019 to 2020, there were 372,000+ Chinese students in the US, and in the UK over 150,000. I mean, these are major, income streams, and also, areas of sort of cultural and academic communication and collaboration. So I just don't think that trend is a particularly healthy one if it does continue. Jerry, you just quipped that Indian doctors will be banned next. But in all seriousness, how far has it gone?
All the way around the world, Ian. It's ubiquitous now in Western or global media, which has a kind of Western influence. It's American influence, and it's taken over Australia, it's taken over the UK, it's taken over much of Europe. For example, in Australia, the Sydney Morning Herald reports that the federal government is being urged to examine reducing Australia's reliance on Chinese-made cranes and electric vehicles, because they could be used for spying, or they could disrupt the country. What it doesn't say anywhere in the article, and I've linked the article, is that who's doing this urging? There is no question who is doing the urging being answered. And I think they're just saying, well, we're doing the urging. And of course, this is the way the media operates. I suspect it's not being urged at all. I think, in my opinion, it's a compliant federal government that's going down the same track in Australia, the same track as their predecessors, at the behest of America's, just to upset China again. So questions are also being asked in the European Parliament about the cranes, particularly by a guy called Tom Berendsen. He's a Dutch member of the European Parliament, and also Britain's Tory party leader of it. This is an interesting name, the China Research Group. He reports there are concerns as well, but he also cites the reasons why he has concerns and why he had a fuss, or we had a fuss, over Huawei. Because the vital information that passes through these products, MI5's chief Andrew Parker said this is not true, but the information passes through these products and can be siphoned off by the Chinese Communist Party, as they call them, the Communist Party of China. There's one more point that I'd like to add about this. First of all, we know that the head of MI5, that's Britain's internal intelligence security, has said Huawei posed no threat. And he's certainly never come out and said electric vehicles do. And the one more point I'd like to add, in this same Sydney Morning Herald article, as a point of balance, it's just in the very last or second from last paragraph, a former head of GCHQ, which is the British intelligence gathering place, head of their security, is quoted as saying, China has no history of disruptive cyber attacks in the way that Russia does. So it's clear that the intelligence community don't see a problem with it. The politicians do, and the media do. So what we're looking at here is not an intelligence assessment, but a populist or populism route that they're taking. That's all I can see from here. From everything I'm looking at Europe, at Australia, and at America, this is what I'm seeing.
It's interesting that you said that that was sort of buried deep down in the penultimate paragraph.
They always are.
Yes, exactly. I mean, this little admission there. But the headlines, obviously, the sort of eye-grabbing, attention-grabbing ones, rather, are right out there. I mean, there's so much conflicting information, therefore, because just on the 18th of February, the Wall Street Journal reported the FBI director as saying that China's cyber attacks on the US infrastructure are now at an unprecedented scale. And then you contrast that with the quote of the GCHQ chap. You know,
MI5 and GCHQ don't have this problem, but exactly. For some reason the politicians do. Who's advising them? Quite.
So, I mean, you know, on the back of that, so we know that the pigeon wasn't a threat, Fernando. The weather balloon was exactly, you know, as it said on the tin, and the spy grains haven't posed any threat at all. Have you come across any evidence that there are, in fact, spies among us?
Well, yes, Ian, I have. In latest news in Australia, the courts have already sentenced a man to prison for what they call foreign interference. His name is Sonny Duong, who, according to the report itself, has a long history of community service in Australia, was a Vietnamese boat refugee who went on to become a successful business person in Australia after arriving there back in the 1980s. He was also the leader of the Liberal Party and once stood for Parliament himself. He was sentenced for, and I had to air quote this, planning to commit an act of foreign interference. The evidence that was given was that he had publicly donated 37,450 Australian dollars to a hospital, and he handed the check to the then minister that was responsible for this project, Alan Tudge, or Tudge, I suppose.
Tudge.
He then, because he was now friends with Tudge, and I'm not kidding here, he had the intention of seeking some kind of help from him. And I need to quote this for you. They say that the purpose of that future conduct was to influence Mr. Tudge regarding the political or governmental processes in Australia to the advantage of the CCP, or the CPC as it should be. At no stage does the report explain what sort of benefit the CCP would get from this, nor who his contacts are, or how he actually contacted them. In fact, even though this should be a matter of national security, there are no details at all in the public forum on what he is supposed to have done incorrectly. So this guy's going to prison because he might have asked a member of parliament who is not even a member of parliament anymore for some kind of help, but didn't. But I think that we should look at some real spies instead of these ones that are perceived spies. China actually really did arrest two spies. One of them was working with North Korea. We're talking about, of course, Michael Spavor. Now, there's a thing that everybody has talked about here in China related to Meng Wanzhou being arrested in Canada at the behest and at the request of American officials. She was accused of having hidden information about deals with Iran to which could get HSBC into trouble. So I'm not going to go into that detail, but here's the thing that I would like you to ponder. Michael Spavor has posted many pictures of himself working, dealing, traveling, even bringing Dennis Rodman to North Korea. This person has absolutely proven to us that he does business with a sanctioned country. But America is not requesting him in extradition, or is not asking Canada to detain him. Nothing. That's a little bit hypocritical and double standard, don't you think? And, well, this is not us telling you that this guy could have been a spy. Recently, there has been a judgment that demands that the Canadian government pays him 7 million Canadian dollars in compensation for, well, the issues that he had when he was captured here in China. So they are acknowledging that he was working for the Canadian government. So a spy is a spy, and it's the state of the world today. America does whatever they want, and that's the rules-based order. They will detain Meng Wanzhou, but they won't detain Michael Spavor. There you go.
Well, yeah, I mean, that really smacks of something very strange, doesn't it? I mean, if I think about myself, if I were to commit a crime in China, then that would be between me and the Chinese authorities, I think. I mean, I'm sort of, teasing this one out now. But then I wouldn't go and ask the British government for compensation. Is that what it's equivalent to? Am I right in thinking it's like that? He was confused. He was accused of something in China, and then he's gone back to, and obviously did a bit of time for it, but then was released, and now he's gone to the Canadian government and saying, "You owe me 7 million quid." Is that? Am I understanding that?
That's exactly what happened. Yeah.
There are different numbers there. It might be 3 million, it might be 5 million, it might be 7 million, or it might be none of the above, because apparently there are non-disclosure agreements involved in this. But the media I've seen has had all three of those numbers there. So there is some money. That's the important thing. So the Canadian government are paying him for his inconvenience in China.
Yeah, absolutely right. But you also mentioned a really good point about the disparity of he's dealing with a sanctioned regime, North Korea, but he's all right. They didn't mention that one. Obviously, then the Chinese lady apparently had dealings with Iran. Not okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, moving on then.
Did you know that even though we hear a lot about China's belligerence towards its neighbors and the need to contain China, it is really important to ask ourselves how belligerent China is in fact. Here's something. After China tested their first atomic bomb, Mao Zedong made a speech stating unequivocally and without conditions that China will never be the first country to strike using atomic or nuclear bombs. To this date, they are the only country to have done so. On the other hand, the USA have not done so, and in fact, they are the only country to have actually made a first, and some people argue, unnecessary strike on Japan. No NATO country has made the policy. India has done so, but with the condition that it will never do so on a non-nuclear country. There you go. Now you know.
Thank you, Fernando. So just then, Jerry, you said something, words to the effect that this happens in both directions. And initially, I thought what you were alluding to was that, like the US, China had likewise banned certain foreign-made or foreign-owned technology here. And that got me then thinking about Tesla vehicles that have reportedly recently been banned from certain areas of certain cities, perhaps at certain times, due to fears that the onboard video cameras could potentially collect and store data. Now, what do you make of this? Is it true? And if so, how widespread is this?
It's not true. Simple as that. It's not true at all. In fact, I think it was Mao Ning who, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the spokesperson, came out shortly after I wrote an article about this. I think she might have been reading me, of course. But what's wrong with that? She's a very knowledgeable person. So I wish. But she came out a few days after I wrote this article and said basically the same as me. It was a very good validation. There is no ban. There's no partial ban on Tesla. There is no government ban. There are some military installations that do not allow any of these types of things in. Now, I remember, anybody who understands the English language industry will know what an IELTS test is, the International English Language Testing System. I would not be allowed in there wearing this watch, for example. This is a very common thing where something is sensitive in nature. So military establishments will say you can't wear a smartwatch while you're in here because they have the capability of transmitting information back to the phone, and the phone can transmit information somewhere else. So yes, there are some areas, some places where no EV can go in unless, as they are with things like BYD, all the data is stored inside this country. So there is an issue. Some military bases, some very sensitive government departments have said to their staff, you can buy a Tesla if you want, but you just can't park it inside the yard here. That's the extent of any ban, and I like the air quotes quote as well. There is no ban on Tesla. There's no ban on iPhones. And if you think about what Gina Raimondo said just the other day, a BYD is like an iPhone on wheels. What's she saying there? What is she telling the people? We can't trust iPhone? If it's an iPhone on wheels, then it's sending information back. And we know that they do this. They send information back for all kinds of different reasons. But that information is stored and it's data protected. It's not harvested and sold off. It's not given to the intelligence community. But I'm fairly sure that with the appropriate legal mechanisms, you can get a court order. The Chinese government can get a court order to go and get that information. And that's really the extent of it. So the answer to your question, no. Tesla is not banned. It's not partially banned. There are just some sensitive places where the departments have said, you can't bring that car into this compound.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would add the fact that Sergei Lavrov, the foreign affairs minister of Russia, uses a Huawei phone. That's pretty interesting. And so does Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. When he visited China last year, he was very happy. Hey, they can listen to me now.
Well, what you laid out there, Jerry, just sounds very logical, rational, and very reasonable, which does stand, I think, in quite stark contrast to what the US is doing to TikTok now. Fernando, do you have anything to add? I don't know about the TikTok issue, and I don't know, is what the US is doing to TikTok now in any way similar to what China has done in banning Facebook, Google, and YouTube within its borders?
The answer to this is no. Why? One thing that people must understand is that TikTok follows every single rule of the land in America. It's very different from Facebook. It's very different from all these other social media. They were asked to follow the rules of China according to the operation of their business, and they chose not to. So that's the difference. And what we're seeing also is TikTok being pushed to sell to an American company. It's just basically protectionism in my eyes. It's just we don't want a foreign company having this monopoly over this particular industry. So this is why you see these discussions being pushed and very publicly done on Instagram, on Facebook, on even X. Obviously, all these companies have an angle. They all want to get rid of this particular competitor so that they can grow and fill in the space for Americans. The issue there is there's always VPNs. So they're just going to open a market for Americans to use VPNs and continue doing what they're doing.
So could we understand that there's no evidence really to suggest that TikTok is flouting any US laws and is spying on US citizens, especially on behalf of the Chinese authorities? I mean, unless, of course, the Chinese are being really crafty and the whole TikTok issue is simply a distraction to divert attention away from their real spying activities. Who knows? Huh? But
if I may interject here and share an idea that I've shared in other circles. Why doesn't Facebook, why doesn't YouTube, why doesn't Twitter or X or whatever creates another company that follows Chinese rules? Because in the end, that's what the ByteDance does. They have a company for China that follows Chinese rules, and they have a company for other countries where they follow other rules. Is as simple as that. So it is interesting to me, why is it that these companies don't do it? Why is it that these companies leave so much money on the table? Because if they were to come into the Chinese market, there is a lot of profit to be made. There's a lot of money to be made. What is keeping them from developing another version of their apps that follow Chinese rules, and then they could make some more money? I think that is the narrative. If they were to do that, there's no longer this, oh, China bans this, China bans that, China bad. So that's something to think about. Why do Elon Musk, why do Mark Zuckerberg, why all these big companies leave money on the table by not adapting their apps to what China requires? They're not banned. They're just choosing not to operate here. Just like LinkedIn. LinkedIn moved out because they were not making the money that they expected to do, given the business model that China required them to follow. That was all. That was it.
You make a very good point there. If I can come in with an addition to that point, that is a really valid point, that they could come here. But if we think about it, why are Facebook, X, all the Google products, YouTube, etc., why are they free? They're free because they're making money without us paying for them. They're taking our data, they're taking it and harvesting it and selling it to the highest bidders. And that is something that China protects. So they come to China. There's two problems. One is they can no longer say, oh, no, the narrative doesn't work. The other is they really can't make money. And this is why LinkedIn pulled out. They couldn't make money because they're not allowed to data harvest. Microsoft actually do operate inside of China. And the reason they do is because if they didn't, 1.4 billion computers would stop using Microsoft Office, or whatever the number is. It's probably more than 1.4 billion computers, because most people have one for work, one for home. It would be millions of billions of computers would stop using Microsoft Office if there was a problem for Microsoft. So they do operate, and Bing is the search engine, and it operates quite well inside of China. I mean, it has some restrictions, of course, but it does operate quite well. So they can. We know they can. They choose not to.
Another prerogative that China has is the hosting of the information. It has to stay within China. So when you look at the TikTok situation, they have the Texas Project, which is basically to ensure to the federal government that all information is stored in the United States. And there's nothing else that TikTok can do. There's nothing else that this company can do. It's just a witch hunt. They haven't actually proven absolutely anything. And in my opinion, if I could just venture it, this is just the witches of Salem back again. Yep. Guilty without actually finding the evidence. Is just, that's it. You can't prove your innocence. So you're guilty. It's really a really sad state of affairs. And well, I guess the only ones that are going to profit are VPN salespeople.
So, yes, quite. I mean, just what you were saying there, Jerry, that how US tech giants also seem to collect and retain data, but they didn't seem that concerned about that, did they? They simply seemed to be concerned because, this is Chinese owned. And yeah, I mean, there is the trade war and the competition argument as well. Maybe it's protectionist, but also maybe it is because it's foreign owned or specifically Chinese owned. I do sometimes wonder whether TikTok were, say, Israeli owned. I wonder what treatment it would receive in the US, but you can answer that one for yourself. Thank you very much, both of you, for your observations. As ever, it's been eye-opening and highly informative talking to you, and I look forward to our next discussion. And thank you out there for watching too. Feel free to comment, to press the like button, to share, and above all, subscribe to our channel. See you next time for more China insights on the 3Ms.